Hello everyone and welcome to the latest Scots Whay Hae podcast, and today I'm joined by writer and poet Michael Pedersen to talk about his debut novel Muckle Flugga, which is out published by Faber. Hello Michael.
Hiya, how you doing? Nice to be here, especially nice to be here in the belly of the Mitchell Library.
Yeah, we're in a very special place to record today. It's absolutely brilliant. If you don't know the Mitchell Library in Glasgow, do come and visit.
It looks like it belongs in a sort of New York set Batman movie, I think, the Mitchell from outside. It's really sort of empirical looking and it wills you in as a book lover or as a writer or anything. As soon as you pass through the doors, you feel like you should be doing something of significance.
Yeah.
And we are. And
it pulls you to pick up a book, definitely. I'm interested, I was just thinking as I introduced it as writer and poet, do you distinguish between the two ever?
Sometimes, yeah. I guess it depends what guise I'm there in. You know, I wear a lot of different hats in literature, and whichever hat I've sort of walked into the room in, or whichever will do the occasion most justice, I tend to introduce myself off the back of that. But writer's a good one, you know, it's a catch-all. Yeah. So I would normally go with writer if it's a general occasion, and then we can get nitpicky about genres after.
Because I think we'll talk about the language in the book and so many other things, but I think you can tell that there's a poet's heart for the person who wrote it. But before we get into all of that, can you tell us about Muckle Flugga? How do you describe it to people?
So Muckle Flugga is a remote, rugged island novel. It's a character drama. It's full of landscape and lore, celestial secrets and bumps in the night. It's full of Scottish history, whilst lending itself to the more sort of magical realism believers among us. It's my attempt at a sort of great Scottish identity novel as well. But really it connects into all the work I've been doing with poetry and with boyfriends, because at the real core of it is a friendship love story between the son of a lighthouse keeper and a stranger from afar.
Yeah, and the relationships throughout are key to the whole story. So why did you want to tell this story as your debut? Did you always have this in mind, or is it linked to more recent publications?
Yeah, it's an amalgamation of all of that. You know, I've always sort of worshipped, as you mentioned before, I write in a lot of genres, and I love where the genres bleed into each other and intersect. You know, I like writing that dissolves the genres. I'm always wanting to be led by the story and the tone of things rather than trying to write something that fits in a box at the end of it. And I read so many novels, and I've always sort of worshipped at the altar of novels, and it was just waiting for a story to get big enough that it grew beyond any of the spaces I could fit it into as a short story or as a piece of poetry or as non-fiction blending onto fiction. And this is the one I knew I always wanted to set it in a lighthouse. And I guess in a way I was on a bit of a romantic quest to find the right lighthouse. I knew it had to be one of Scotland's lighthouses, one of the ones built by the ancestors of the writer Robert Louis Stevenson, which is the vast majority that orbit around Scotland at that point in time. I had my eyes on Barnes Nest Lighthouse outside Dunbar for a while. There was Corswell Lighthouse over near Stranraer on the west coast as well. I was just trying to find a home for this lighthouse novel, and I knew a lot of it would come from that. And then in 2019, where I was still sort of penning away on boyfriends, I ended up going on a trip up to Shetland as part of Noriki with Kevin and alongside Bill Drummond. And we put on a screening of one of Bill's films and a poetry reading alongside that in Baltasound Town Hall, which is on Unst, and it's the most northern arts venue in the UK.
Okay. And
we stood on the northern tip of Unst and gazed off to the island of Muckle Flugga, which used to be called North Unst, and Unst was South Unst, and I saw that lighthouse, and it felt like the sort of the space station of the sea, you know, the last stop at the end of the abyss. If you went straight up from it, you were looking towards Arctic North. You wouldn't hit the Nordics on the right or Faroe Islands on the left. You would just keep going, and it felt like looking off into a distant planet. And I thought that's where this story has to be. And there was various revolutions and evolutions of the characters went around. It was friendship at the core of it, you know, off the back of touring boyfriends both in the UK and America. After that came out later on, as the story developed in my head, I was a sort of human hard drive of my own friendship lore and other people's friendship lores, and it was a beautiful thing to be invested with so many stories of friendship. And I knew that had to come out in the story of these two characters. I knew there had to be differences with them, peculiarities, turbulences of them. I knew they needed to be carrying like an emotional weight. And when I looked to that island, I knew it had to be a small cast. It had to be intense as the landscape around it. And Muckle Flugga, after a couple of years carrying it about in my bread box, is what surfaced.
I knew it was a real place. I didn't know it had previously been named something else. So when did that change happen?
I'm not entirely sure, but it was in more recent incarnation, and it was designed, and the name change was around the lighthouse.
Right.
Before the lighthouse was built there, it was obviously a sort of rocky outcrop island of Shetland. And then Muckle Flugga Lighthouse arrives, commissioned during the Crimean War to sort of make that waterway a bit safer. And I love the fact that that lighthouse, known as the Impossible Lighthouse, because of how difficult it was to build on that rock, was born out of war. And I don't feel like it's ever stopped battling since.
Right. And it sounds as though you always knew perhaps that you were going to write a novel. It was just the right time or the right story coming around.
Yeah, definitely. I tried a lot of short stories over lockdown. I've still got like a bank of those, but all of them wrapped themselves up far too neatly and far too quickly, which was, it's nicely satisfying when you're trying to tell a tale, but you want one of these stories to keep growing. And then when I started to write the character of Ouse, particularly the lighthouse keeper's son, in relationship with his dad known as the father in that sort of formidable biblical sense, he just wouldn't stop talking to me. And I knew I'd already started by talking about his existence there, telling a story that was longer than a short story, but I didn't want to put my faith in it too much. I had to write into it, and I had to let it develop first. And I did a really weird thing with the story as it started to sort of unfurl from my head. I actually wrote it first as what ended up being a 40-page script synopsis. So characters, location, happening. So I was writing it as this sort of pre-document, the due diligence to writing a film script, with no intention of ever writing the film script. I just felt I could compartmentalise the story in that way, in that I could give enough details that I knew where it would start and where it would end, but there wouldn't be a surfeit of details that there wouldn't be too many that by the time it came to writing it, it felt as if it was written. That 40-page story script synopsis still had unanswerables with me. We need to get to this scene, but we could either do it this way or this way. And then by writing it in that manner, the characters sort of took the reins a little bit of their own future, because there was a few different options ahead of them, and sometimes they usurped all of the options I'd chosen for them and got to that eventuality a different way. So I had the basis of a story, I had the sort of longevity of it, and it just had to inject what felt like the soul into it afterwards.
That's such an interesting. I was going to ask you how you approach longer form, but was that to almost have that, you could call scene, if you like, at the end of that, and that bit was complete, and then you could move the camera to the next scene?
It grounded me, and it was like the whole novel is set on only a few different locations with a very small cast, so it's the only way I could be in control of it, because writing short stories or writing poems, they're so contained, and every time that you write something in a novel, it reverberates throughout it for hundreds of pages on either side. So you have to be so sort of magisterial in the way that you control the kingdom of it, that by writing it as a fictitious synopsis for a screenplay that was never going to get made, it allowed me to feel like I'd captured the essence, identity, and the span of the novel with enough control that I could, parachute in and out these characters' lives, and without causing any inauthentic changes within them. It's such a strange way to do it. I don't know anyone else that's done it that way, and it's a kooky way, and it's not a way that really I could recommend forensically to someone, because it's quite unprecedented, I think, in moving that into the novel space. But it's just the way that worked for me. I guess I was feeling in the dark a little bit, and that became the rudder on my rudderless ship.
And do you think that was in part to differentiate from your other forms of writing? Well, how do I know that when I'm writing this is the novel? and I'm not tempted to wrap it up quickly or
Yeah, definitely, because by writing it in that sort of more formulaic script synopsis way, I held myself back from writing any of the dialogue, which obviously I love doing. It injects identity in the characters. I can let my flamboyancies out that way, and there's no space for poetic aberrations in a script synopsis either. It has a far more sort of forensic, formulaic DNA structure to it. So all of the things that I guess are me indulging myself, I was prevented from doing. So it meant that I really had the armoury ready for a novel before I took it out to sea.
So in terms, you were kind of editing as you went. If you had felt that there was something which didn't fit.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know, when you put scenes into boxes and add them together in a script, it's really easy to move the parts around. And of course we can move the parts of our own life around in that way as well. What if I'd met this person earlier in my life? How would that have affected? Well, I wouldn't have moved there. I wouldn't have chased them down to London. I wouldn't have had that sort of rogue career in that profession. I wouldn't have met that person if I wasn't there. So you can move your own life around hypothetically, retrospectively, and it helps you understand what it's like to move these characters' lives around. And lots of people become their characters, you know. They feel they are their characters, or it's a different version of them, or a different manifestation of them, or a them in a parallel universe. I didn't feel like that at all. None of these characters were me.
Okay.
But I felt I could write them with such an intensity after doing that script synopsis that I could sit down at a table with them and have a conversation. And when the book got into, I guess, its later stages, I did an edit character by character, just focusing on that person, their dialogue, their life, their story, and made sure that they existed as, I guess, the star in their own movie individually each day I spent with them. Everyone had to be the main player and the leading role, so I tried to see the novel through each of their eyes. And at no point in time did I ever felt I became the characters, but they were definitely snooping around after me, following me to the bathroom, bothering me as I was cooking dinner. They were just immersively in my ears at that point in time, and then they felt real.
It sounds as though if someone did option this for film, you've done all the work for them. It's ready to go.
I hope so. You know, lots of people are like, oh, it has a real filmic quality, and I guess I take a smug satisfaction in that, because I sort of wrote it from a filmic understanding of what this would be. I wrote the novel based on the script for a movie that's never been made.
And we'll talk about the people.
That almost sounds David Lynchian to me, in a very humble, small manifestation.
But you know, it's funny you should say that, because when I was reading it, there are parts that are, yes, cinematic, but characters as well. The kind of individual characters are so strong, and I say we'll talk about them in a moment. But place is of huge importance, and you talk a bit about Muckle Flugga, the place, and how it affects those who are there.
Yeah, well, Muckle Flugga, the real Muckle Flugga, is this sort of beautiful, erratic, rocky island rallying against the ocean, and there's not much on it. It's quite small in surface footprint beyond the lighthouse keeper's quarters, and these serrated edged rocks around it. Whereas my Muckle Flugga has grown to sort of 10 times that size. It's the real Muckle Flugga morphed with a sort of Gormenghast, if anyone's read that Mervyn Peake trilogy type creation, where new parts of it are constantly sort of unsheathing themselves, and the island is known to shapeshift as well. And you know, there's a little bit of a prod about whether that's a psychological result of your isolation and your mind letting the island grow, or whether it's you know, physically growing beneath you. But I think the island comes a character. And there's a lot of conversation between Firth, who's came up from big city in the central belt, who really knows the world better. You know, this young character of Ouse that knows every stone and rock pool and visits every creature that stops by his small place, because maybe it's not so small to him. A lot of islanders will say that when their islands are described as remote. It's like, remote to who? And or whether he knows this world better, or whether this well-travelled itinerant writer who's spent, you know, a lot of time in big cities and traversed all around, whilst never really feeling like he has a proper home since this terrible things happened with the loss of his mother. So you're seeing these two characters and their unique perspectives of the world, and wondering who does actually have the bigger, most more fulfilling view of things from that perspective. But a lot of the characters are strengthened by the surroundings.
Yeah.
We find them in moments of grief, in moments of turmoil, and a lot of their fortification, a lot of their healing, and a lot of their catharsis comes from these deep gulps of solitude. You know, you feel the trauma and the ferocity and the performance of city life sort of seep out of the character of Firth. The longer he spends on the island, he becomes the version of himself that he used to respect.
Yeah.
Ouse is so nourished by this place that he feels rooted in it and connected to it. And I guess the biggest worry from him is whether he feels he is himself without it.
Yeah.
Because he's in such great admiration of the beauty and the sort of, you know, the theatrics of nature that unravel around him all the time.
I think perspective is exactly the right word for it, because Ouse, there's a fear of what lies beyond, and yet for Firth, compared to where he's coming from, which is Edinburgh, it looks so kind of such a small, you can call it community, you know,
Yeah.
a couple of people and the others who are in and around there. But the role of Edinburgh, or actually just the outside world, what does that represent? Is that almost like there's hope, but there's also temptation and all of those kind of things?
Yeah, you know, the outside world is tantalising and full of temptation, but also of terror. For Ouse, it's the unknown, you know. His imagination has travelled all throughout the world through the stories of Louis Stevenson and other writers he loves. He's got this adventurous spirit, but it exists in daydreams and reveries and literature and in the conversations about stories he's had with people he loves. Whereas physically, his passport is not well stamped. You know,
Yeah.
he's not left this small orbit, yet he all feels well travelled from a certain perspective, but he's aware his degree of well-travelled might all come tumbling down as soon as he gets on a boat to even, you know, Aberdeen beyond the water. You know, this is unknown terrain. And he's young. Any great exploration is going to fill your belly full of knots, I think. And
Yeah.
Ouse is in that position. Also, he wants to explore the world, but there's a lot of family bonds that tie him to this place. It's not just his love for Muckle Flugga and Outstack and the surrounding Shetland Islands. It's the fact that his father wants him to stay there, needs him to stay there. He's in this lighthouse profession, which is quite commonly bequeathed to your apprentice, who is his son at this point in time. So there's this whole fracture of leaving this world. There's not just a physical thing, it's a human thing.
Yeah.
And first, the opposite. He sort of came to contradict himself. He's escaped the clamour of the city, found sort of peace and self-fulfillment in this island, and now wants to flip that on its head and perhaps sing the boons and the benefits of big city life to young Ouse, who ensorcels him and captivates him. And there's such a contradiction in that, and a sort of power play in that a little bit as well, because Firth knows the unknown, he's lived in it, and he could sell any form of this dream to Ouse, and he's very aware of how influential he can be based on how he packages this product outside of it. So I think both of them is carrying a real joy of place alongside the sort of either contradictions of it or an appetite whet of, in Ouse's opinion, perhaps even betraying the place he come from. Like, do we betray our home by leaving it? It's such a interesting question, and you know that it always has reverberations and ripples in modern incarnations. If you leave home and go away to uni somewhere else, people are proud of you, and then there's this other small voice that says, so you're too good for here, you're working so hard because you want to leave here. And that narrative is a challenge to me. And we take these things deeply personally sometimes, when actually it's another emotional toolkit that's taken this person to this place, but yet we can't help but feel like, in a way, we are caught in the crossfire of that, because we are something attached to that place that they're leaving. So can you ever not take that personally, even though you are proud of the person for, you know, following a dream or achieving something they want to achieve, or and
letting go in the case
it's a
of
real
the
emotional
father.
maelstrom.
It really is, and Firth, you're never sure of his motivations at all.
Yeah.
Really, you know, and I don't think he is either. I think he's got this struggle within him. Well, I mean, let's talk about the characters then. Let's start with the father.
Yeah.
Who is the lighthouse keeper on Muckle Flugga?
Yeah, the father. You know, all the characters that we know the names of are named after bodies of water. Firth of Forth, and Ouse, the River Ouse. And then we've got Figgy, which is the Figget Burn. And, you know, everyone has a different type of water in them. I feel like there's such close proximity between people and the water we're drawn to, whether that's the ocean or a pond or a small stream, or I feel like there's some sort of like emotional companionship for a lot of people in water, that whole Blue Moon Feedy and Blue Mind Feedy stuff. The father is the tempest. You know, he's the unnameable storm at this point in time. And Firth's a bifurcated soul, but I think the father's the biggest contradiction of them all. You know, he really feels a calling to be a lighthouse keeper. It's what he wants to do. He sees it as a life-saving, venerable enterprise to drag himself up to the top of that tall, formidable structure and cast out a beam to either warn people away from dangerous and treacherous rockways or to guide them safely to home. You know, it is this beautiful beacon, and the lighthouses are the sort of watchtowers of the sea, and he's very much part of that. He feels a real faith and a pride in the good he's doing, yet at the same time they've suffered a tremendous grief. The mother, his wife, Lucy's mother, has recently died. He's fractured by that. He's angry about it. He's belligerent about it. He's drinking too much. He's being, you know, most abominable to the people that are closest around him, the people that love him the most, which is a real risk that's pervasive throughout all human nature. You know, our guard's down the most, and we hurt the people we love us more than anyone else on this planet by precedent. And if we're not careful, it can cause a sort of emotional explosion inside of us that casts shrapnel out to these tender human beings who try to nurture us and care for us, and Ouse is that person caught in the crossfire. And the father does want to be a good father. I think he does believe, despite all his raggedness and belligerence, that he is a good person and that he is affecting change within this world. And he wants his world now to stay small. He doesn't want other people in it. He wants Ouse to do what he's told because he knows it's for the best, and every outside influence is potentially a risk.
I mean, he doesn't really want anyone coming at all. If they're bird watchers, is that right? They're kind of okay if they're bird watchers,
they're
but
okay.
No writers.
You know, bird watchers, he sort of chased the other keepers away in the ferocity of his grief, and he needs a little bit of extra income by people coming to stay on the island in the Boffey, and bird watchers are the safest bet because they don't want to make too much noise because they'll scare away what they've came to gaze upon. They're normally come in isolation. They spend long amounts of times outdoors, staring in silence at nature, making notes in their journals, and they pretty much stick to themselves. And he's okay with that. He needs the financial stability of it. He wouldn't have them there if he could call it, but it's a necessity that he can stomach for this point in time. Whereas Firth sort of abuses that notion and books himself in as a bird watcher, but has, you know, alternative aspirations to paint the wildlife and this sort of find and work out his own life. He's coming there for a lot of different reasons that he's packaged into it, and the father is none too happy about this.
He's suspicious of artists, is that, or the artistic, let's put it that way, because his son is artistic, as we come to find out. He's
noticed artistic qualities in Ouse. Ouse is this really dexterous knitter and sewer. Of course, it's one of Scotland's most valuable exports up in Shetland and the Faroe Islands, these beautiful knitwear that he makes, and Ouse has represented a real sort of talent and an imagination and a proclivity for that, and the father's really belittling of that. He calls it like his pocket money job, even though it could be quite a career for him. It's a distraction for what he really should be doing about learning how to man this lighthouse and answering this most noble of callings that the father's vehemently convinced is the case. And so anything he can do to keep Ouse focused on the keeper's duties as opposed to, I guess, what is becoming his passions at that point in time, this sort of artistic creativity that comes with sewing and knitting. And Firth, and any artist, represents something, the spark that could light the kindling in Ouse's imagination at that point in time. So the father recognised that quite quickly, and there's an immediate tension between the two of them. There's a bit of an arrogance with the father, that his smarts and his focus will drown out anything that anyone else has to say, and also his sort of physical presence.
Yes.
He feels very in control of the situation, based on his physicality and his unfortunate handsomeness.
He's an intimidating character, absolutely.
He's an intimidating character. I think it's a joy. I mean, he's not without his pleasantries, though, and he's not without his frills. I think when he's holding court, when he's had a few whiskies and you're in his favour, it probably feels incredible to be on the father's good side. It feels like having your own sort of, brutish, beautiful guardian leaning over your shoulder, protecting you from the world and keeping you within his nook. He is a safe harbour from that perspective. But as soon as you fall out of sync with him, and he is a tempestuous and mercurial being, so that could happen without you even realising it. You can step wrongly with the father very easily at that point in time. And the switch of going from being on his good side to his bad side is a very dangerous thing, and in such a small an isolated community of free humans, it can affect your day-to-day with such a sort of palpable toxicity that it makes you a sort of meek mouse cowering away from the father's every move.
And I'm thinking about his relationship with Ouse. He clearly loves his son, but it's also a reminder of what he's lost as well, so there's that complexity.
Yeah, of course. Ouse, there's a lot more of the mother in Ouse than the father, at least the way the father sees it. His kindness, his benevolence, his sort of meekness, and his cleverness. His love of reading. These were all qualities the mother had, and they're all qualities that the father was sort of lovingly mocking about, but without the mother there to be the focus of that love, and for Ouse to be the secondary boundaries, all the lovingness in that mockingness is gone, and it's just a reminder of the person that he misses at that point in time. And it's unfair and it's cruel to Ouse, and he tries to control it as best he can, but he doesn't always manage to adopt what would be the expected fatherly role.
And I think initially with Ouse we see this artistic side and this gentle soul, but increasingly I've written down fragile yet fierce. There's a strength there. Yeah,
I think we grow with Ouse more as a character than any of the other characters in the book, and I think that's because he's a bit younger.
Yes.
And it's also because he's spent less time with people this intensely. A lot of the visitors that come to stay for the summers are a lot more antisocial. They fit the bird watching ilk that the father wants them to be, of being somewhat hermits, focused on gazing at these creatures they've came to see, whereas Firth is there under ostensible means, and actually Ouse becomes the focus of his day-to-day interest and reality there. So he's a real risky character, but at the same time Ouse, he's giving, but he's not gullible, and he understands a lot of the social dynamics that people bring with him. He relates them a lot to characters in books, but of course that provides us with a lot of acumen. The writers and the storytellers we read are some of the most complex beings that have walked this earth, or they've observed some of the most complex beings that they've walked this earth, and Ouse is salivated and edified himself with all of these brilliant stories and words. So he's growing, he's young and he's in his late teens, and that period of time is a real sort of coming of age period for him, and this is a real coming of age relationship with Firth. He's trying to work out what it is. He's trying to work out his willingness to depend on it alongside his reluctance to want to still be a free spirit at that point in time. Ouse is the one who everyone wants to be in control of his life, and he has to understand what degree of control he gives away and what he keeps from himself, and he really needs to fortify him. And I think if there was anyone calling out for a life coach or a confidant or a partner or somebody to just be that neutral adjudicator, that advisory mentor, it would be Ouse that would need them.
Yeah.
And thankfully, that call is answered.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if I give any spoilers away, let me know and we take them out. But we see when he does go to market with his wares that there's a change in him there. You can see that there's a change.
Yeah, there's a pride in that, you know. These creations that he's conjured, sculpted, these knitwear creations that his father has been belittling about, is called pocket money, all of a sudden are the sort of hit of the craft fair. They sell out fastest. People want hold of them. People want to know who he is. He has an identity through these brilliant objects he's created. There's people that are, I guess, scouting the craft fair that would take him on as an apprentice. It's the thing that Firth is most impressed about him, as well as these artistry behind it. So he has a real euphoric period there, and he's paid well for what he's produced. You know, he's spent a lot of time over these, and he has an income that's probably on a par with the father's income at that point in time as a lighthouse keeper, and it gives him sort of strength and identity, but he also feels guilty about it in the way that, you know, some people who get offered promotions ahead of their partners, or when they get to a career level ahead of their partners, feel a guilt about it, because you don't want to be seen to be succeeding over and above someone, especially someone like the father who might take a lot of that personally. So Ouse has opportunity fall on his lap, and he has to work out what to do with that.
And let's move on to Firth, who is, you know, the cuckoo in the nest, as we've explained. When this, to him, originally is going to be a final journey in some sense, isn't it?
Oh, in every sense. You know, we meet Firth at his lowest ebb. Very quickly. There's no spoilers in this. In the second chapter, we meet Firth hanging off the side of a bridge, this sort of metal monster. His life having, in his opinion, sort of kamikaze piloted down into a crash landing. He feels inauthentic in everything that he's doing. He feels, even though he's very young, that he's peaked too early in everything that he's creating or giving his attention to since, as a writer in Edinburgh, is just sort of cobbled together as a bit of a hoax. He's his own worst critic, and he doesn't think he's worth any value as a human being anymore. He thinks himself probably toxically capable of negatively impacting the lives of everyone he cares about, and he's walked out to that bridge, not for the first time, with a sort of wavering degree of commitment to put a final full stop to his life, and something from the past comes back to visit him, changes the current of his thinking, and we see in that the sort of mercurial flippancy that does exist in him, which is exciting but also dangerous. And I really wanted to conjure a character that we meet in this terrible disposition at their lowest ebb, and have them climb back down from that bridge and claw their life back from the ashes, piece by piece. Every day Firth is alive from henceforth is a sort of beautiful defiance of nature, and it's a sort of success and a victory for life. And it doesn't mean that every day is going to be utopic paradise, since he's still going to have bad days, but by continuing to exist, he has I guess carved back a piece of humanity when it could have very nearly been lost. And I want to feel the success and the pride and the joy in Firth, because he becomes his own anthem for survival. And it doesn't mean he then doesn't make more bad decisions, and he doesn't frustrate us, and we don't suspect his intentions as not always being having his self at the centre of them. But the fact that he's decided to keep on living is triumphant enough in itself.
You think subconsciously there's a hope there, even if he would never admit to it?
Yeah, I think so. He doesn't decide to keep on living for eternity, just a few more days. He wants to address something, a promise to his grandfather that he remembered from his youth, that he'd forgotten amongst all the sort of social theatrics of high society living in Edinburgh, or his attempt to try and become part of that. And he just decides to keep on living for a little bit longer. And he doesn't think his own life is on a sand timer at that point in time, but I don't think he ever indefatigably believes that it's a foregone conclusion. There's always going to be a little cosmic beam of hope in him, and just as much as that cosmic beam of hope has decided to grant him a small epoch of time, I think the next stage of that is a little bit of hope in his belly, deciding that this could be the big change in his life. Yeah. This could be the one that really turns things around, because he is looking for that.
Yeah. The mother is a kind of ghostly presence there, but an important one.
Yeah, I mean, she has been the most like-minded and influential human on Ouse's life. He mourns her, he misses her, he sees her in himself, and we find out that she's died fairly recently, and that it's been quite sort of dramatic, and that the mother, there's a lot of rumours about how the mother died, and why the mother died, and who's responsible for it, and we don't really find out the factual truth of those rumours at first. It allows us to consider the various ways of this person leaving and how it might affect everyone in the orbit, but you can tell that very much she was the social magnet that connected Ouse and the father. They got on because of her ameliorating that relationship, and they both got on better with her than each other, and now they're having to like really reconfigure their relationship from that perspective. And you can tell the mother had presence. She filled a room, so she's not just physically missing from this small island, but there's a whole sort of emotional ghost that's travelling all around it. And with a place like that, of a sort of quantifiable geographical area, she exists in every part of it. Every pond, every leaf, every brick, every room, she's been in there. She's injected her presence in it. She's painted her love all over it. So they'll miss her everywhere all the time. And her loss has hit the father and Ouse in very different ways.
Yeah.
And one element of that with Ouse is the reverberation of his grief has brought another ghostly, spectral character back from the past. And we find out little bits about the mother as we go on. But we only ever find out about the mother from someone else's perspective, from the way Ouse misses her, from the way the father misses her, from the way that she often frustrated Figgy, from the way that she moved between the islands. You know, the ghost of her presence is the way it connects these people, but there's no journal entries, there's no first-hand narratives from her. She's very much a sort of social currency that exists between them all.
And as you've hinted at there is a supernatural aspect to the novel, and definitely a Gothic feel to it. Is that something you always wanted to kind of engage with?
Oh yeah, I love Gothic splendour. You know, I grew up as a bit of a fantasy kid, like reading Mervyn Peake and all the Gormenghast books, Tolkien, Philip Pullman. You know, I went full on into sci-fi and fantasy literature, but the stuff that really appealed to me was the sort of light magical realism to it, some of the Gabriel Garcia Marquez stuff, things which, you know, were complex character dramas but were very much happening in our world, and depending how far you push your own belief system, could be feasible or could not. It depends how you feel about the paranormal, about afterlives, about faith and religions, about reincarnations, about all of these stories which either mythology or religion or spiritualism adopt as their own sort of edicts at that point in time.
Because often with magical realism, it is when the emotions are heightened, whether that's love, whether it's grief, whatever it is, and that certainly runs through Michael Flugga. Yeah,
I think so. There's I guess the character we've not touched upon, and I'll pull into the fore now, is that Ouse, when he's in his deepest moments of either joy or trauma or turbulence or tribulation, often has a life coach and confidant appear to him from the spectral world, and that is the ghost of Robert Louis Stevenson, who is his favourite writer. He's devoured his oeuvre, he's invested in his stories, he's fought deep and hard about the man behind these creations, and any time that he's sort of between a rock and a hard place or wanting to jump for joy, the ghost of Robert Louis Stevenson appears to him, and it's only Ouse that can see Stevenson, so immediately we're suspicious about that. But who would you want to appear to you to give you advice and succour and sapience when you're in your trickiest moments? And for me, and for this character, it would be my favourite writer, and his favourite writer is Stevenson. It's his books that he's read with the upper degree of zealotry, so it's his world that he feels he knows on a sort of near equilibrium to his own world. So of course they share a commonality in that. So Stevenson appears and talks in Stevensonian brogue a lot of the time. He is as useful as he is frustratingly befuddling. He very rarely gives a straight answer. He is not giving your sort of 10-point plan or your 5-year plan about how to change your life. He is speaking with all of the sort of literary flamboyance as a storyteller of his ilk might. But he is very supportive to Ouse, and he does act as a crutch and a staunch him from that perspective. And I read, I slavoured over all the letters of Robert Louis Stevenson to try and invest his narrative with a bit of his spirit. And some of his text is direct quotes from a lot of his letters, especially the friendship love letters between Stevenson and J.M. Barrie, the author of Peter Pan. The fact that these two incredible writers, two of the best known writers in the English language at that point in time, are writing these beautiful sort of sugar-coated friendship love letters to each other still blows my mind from that perspective. And they never met. Years and years of writing to each other, praising and applauding each other's work, and they never actually met. And in fact, Barrie writes, this is a small tangent but an exciting, Barrie writes a version of them meeting after Stevenson dies, and about where they meet in Edinburgh, because they were there briefly at the same time, and they go and get a little bit boozy together, and then they go chapdoor running and sort of holding the city to rights and sort of write into existence the meeting that never happened. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing, to sort of take back control of the past in that way, to give you a little bit of resolution. And in fact, when I first read that version of it, I thought it was a factual story.
Right.
They were in Edinburgh at that point in time. They could have met each other, and I'm like, what do you mean they never met? I've read this story about this brilliant night out, but it was the happy ending that they never got to have. And Stevenson is very aware of everything that happened in his life, and of course his family, the Stevenson lighthouse engineers, built all of Scotland's great lighthouses, or the vast majority of them. Muckle Flugga, the very lighthouse Ouse lives in, was engineered and designed by Stevenson's dad and his uncle. So in a way, Ouse jokes that it's his fault he's there, from that perspective.
And am I right that Stevenson's dad, a bit like Ouse's father, wanted them to be in lighthouses rather than so he went through a very similar dilemma, I guess with more weight and expectation in it. And the Stevenson family at that point in time were affluent, they were well respected, there'd been a couple of generations of lighthouse engineers, and Stevenson initially went to university to study engineering to follow into the family business. It blows up after a period of time there where Stevenson gets obsessed with literature and verse and sociality, goes to Edinburgh Uni, he gives up his faith in God temporarily. He's noted to be spending time with sex workers and drunkards at that point in time. He starts the Liberty, Revenants and Justice League with his pals, which is to forget everything your parents have taught you, which in my sort of estimation is where the devil's advocate cocktail bar is at the moment. So he was really becoming that sort of young righteous literary figure that we all sort of learned to know and love years later. So they have this big blowout, him and his dad is, laying it on emotionally thick in terms of saying, you'll lay my whole life's work to waste if you don't follow me into this profession. They come to this semi-amicable negotiation where he goes back to university to study law, becomes an advocate, then just to abscond from that faith and then follow himself into literature. And a lot of people said when some of the summer internships he went up towards Shetland, towards Muckle Flugga, and actually seeing all these lighthouses raised his gusto like a storm. Instead of becoming a writer, he wasn't thinking about how masterfully they were engineered, he was thinking about these
great stories of the open sea and the unknown islands and the treasure that lay beyond. So I guess he used his engineering training up and around the coast of Scotland in a very different way than they intended. And I actually studied law and temporarily became a lawyer before giving it up for the literary faith. So I feel a kinship there.
Kinship yourself. Well, we've got the influence of Stevenson in evidence, and it is a very literary novel. You have the library that the mother has kind of bequeathed to Ouse as well. Are there others in evidence? I was thinking Lewis Grassic Gibbon and Sunset Song, because you've got the map at the start, as you would have Kinradi in Sunset Song, but you've also got Ouse's connection with the land, as you would with Chris in Sunset Song. And I wondered am I imagining this, or is that something that...
If it wasn't something I was conscious of.
Okay.
I hope it is to a certain extent.
But I love that then, that someone, I can come and read that into something, and people will read their own literary influences and all of those things. Yeah,
there's definitely tributes and love letters to a lot of Scottish literature in there. Definitely to some of the work of Alistair Gray. In terms of some of the fantastical elements, I've learnt so much from Alistair, especially from Lanark, but also from Poor Things and a lot of his literature. Also a lot of Neil Gunn stuff like the Highland River and the Silver Darlings, that whole I am the pick, this sort of Scottish identity, what we carry with us. There's so much of that feeding into the father from that perspective as well. And even a lot of the poetry I've carried and sort of looked up to, Liz Lockhead and Jackie Kay, and a lot of how they've learned to understand Scotland through their guys and their vision. That hasn't sort of manifested itself as directly, but it's definitely in the sort of hinterland of the way the novel was written. So I think there's a real tribute to a lot of the greats of Scottish literature in there, because they were my education. I didn't study literature at university. I read those books, I ruminated them, I talked about them with friends, I watched their movie or play adaptations when they came out as well. So they are they're the altar that I'm worshipping under. And
Neil Gunn again makes sense, because I think my feeling about Lewis Grassic Gibbon was the connection Ouse has in particular with the land. That it's a physical relationship, it's an emotional relationship, and it's one of the reasons he fears leaving.
Of course. He wants to he spits into the sand to make sure that his enzymes and his DNA are bubbling away in there, and he very much feels like the lighthouse has grown botanical roots and has planted itself to the island. He sees himself a custodian of that space and time, not in any way an owner of it. It's just a stewardship. He's just there to help that place flourish, and it flourishing gives him sustenance at that point in time. And of course he's terrified that if he goes away he'll wither and die, because there's so much sustenance comes into him from there, and it's so intricately connected to his happiness, his joy and his creativity, that he wonders if snapping that umbilical cord will be his downfall at the same time. It's all he knows, and he's loved it.
We've talked about some of the themes in the book. Grief obviously is a big one, family life, love of different types, but it's a celebration of life. That's how I read it at the end.
I think so. Each character is looking to find more joy. Ouse wants to follow his creative ambitions. He wants to learn to put himself first. He wants to learn how to become an adult like the adults he admires. He wants to learn how to galvanise himself into a more imaginative being based on what he's written. Robert Louis Stevenson is there as a life coach and confidant and a mentor, in the way that he was a mentor to a lot of younger writers. He takes his responsibility as a Imagineer rather than an engineer very seriously, and Ouse is the focus of his attention at that point in time. Firth has clawed back his life from the ashes. He's decided to live a little longer, and that will never be underestimated. Every moment, every day he's alive is a sort of bit of a an anthem of victory, and he's found in Ouse, for all of his sort of mishandling and his frustrations and his sometimes selfish decision-making processes, he genuinely believes with unwavering integrity he has the ability to make Ouse's life better. And there's a kindness in that, however misguided. The character of Figgy is sort of looking on from afar. She's the local storekeeper. She grew up a couple of years younger than the father, but has always been there and takes a real motherly interest in Ouse after his own mother having left. And she sort of hovers and orbits around them with benevolence and her own motivations, which you're trying to work out at that point in time. Everyone... And the father just wants to keep saving lives, and he wants his son to follow him in this profession that he's built for him, that he feels is safe, and he feels makes this world a better place. So you can't really question any of the good intentions of each of their motivations, which means that there's no obvious villain. You know, we're all our own heroes and anti-heroes to a certain extent. Everyone wants something else, but they want it for their own manifestation of good.
I'm glad you mentioned Figgy, because she gives another perspective. We've got these three characters who, as you say, are the kind of directors of their own story, of their own lives, going through it, but then we see a kind of wider panorama of the situation from Figgy.
Yeah, I mean, Figgy represents what exists outside the intensity of that mother-father-child relationship. She's an onlooker, she's a friend, she's a love interest, she's a sort of extended version of the family, and she's someone that has both lived away from the island and moved back to it. She's someone that's juggled her own family responsibility, and she's someone that has a very different perspective to that situation on account of being an onlooker. And she takes an interest in Firth as well. You know, there's a new person in this island, and she thinks that could be good for Ouse. And she takes it very seriously, an obligation for her to work out whose side she's on. She very much wants to feel like she's making the situation better for everyone. And it's a hard thing to do. There's so many different perspectives, and there's no clear-cut answers, and she just needs to... She's also, you know, a bit... She also feels like quite spectral at times, because she's often watching without interfering. You know, she's far more in control of the matter than her meek innocence would allow you to believe at first.
But there's also another love there, a different one going through. And if it's a celebration of life, I also think, and I think this with all of your writing, it's a celebration of language. I mean, it's a joy to read from start to finish. We're going to hear a reading in a moment which will exemplify that. Is it as much a joy to write as it seems to be?
Yeah, you know, I've always loved language in every form it comes, and you know, we had no writers or artists in the family. I was the first one from a huge family of, you know, 25 plus cousins to go to university, loads of mechanics and hairdressers and cleaners and nursery nurses and really good trades in there, but it wasn't like a super literary family. So each time I learned a new word, whether it was via one of my peers or a book or my mum, I would learn how to use it, and it felt like a bit of a superpower, because I could then express myself with a higher degree of certainty. And actually it was risky using language at that point in time, you know, in Leaf and Portobello. If you come up with a word like carnapsuous or glister in a playground chat, you put yourself at risk of a ribbon. You know, there was a vulnerableness and identity, there was a risk in using language which alienated other people, so I really had to fight for it. And any forms of my writing have to be a celebration of language at the same time. It is quite flamboyant. In some ways it's not particularly in vogue. It's overly poetic sometimes and not too story driven. But if that's how these characters see the world, then it has its place. And if it rings with exactitude or certainty, or if there's a bit of melody in it and it carries something special into that moment, I often see the world in these sort of animated forms. Because there's what exists, and there's everything we carry into it, and it's the version of ourselves that is what we're seeing mixed with our imagination, and the language for me has to capture all of that. And of course, in such a raw and beautiful and intense place as Muckle Flugga, surrounded by the vicissitudes of the ocean and the weather, and this huge lighthouse casting off its beam into the distance, the invitation for the language to be as celebratory as the wildness of the place was just irresistible to me.
Oh, I think that's the perfect place to have a reading, Michael, if you wouldn't mind, and we can hear that language for ourselves.
So I'm feeling like we're going to go into the Father. I've got two versions. I was going to do a little taste of the prologue, and I had Ouse and Robert Louis Stevenson and the Father, and I was going to give you a snippet of one of the characters based on where I felt the conversation went. But I'm feeling the Father's ferocity and indignation in me at the moment.
Okay.
Muckle Flugga prologue. On the island of Muckle Flugga sits one of the most formidable lighthouses on this or any planet. Its wild peril of light is capable of guiding boats and their humans to safety in spite of all manners of storms, gales and hails, not to mention whirlpools, pirates, straying submarines and a litany of other hunters of the aquatic deep. On account of being charged by starlight, the beam of Muckle Flugga lighthouse is rumoured to be infinite in its luminosity. The great light, which starts the size of a modest meteor, if mishandled, has been known to dwindle to little more than the circumference of a gold coin. That might sound useless, but to a poor soul lost in a thick har or pernicious squall, even a glisk of light can prove enough to rope the way home. The island itself is a dramatic uprising of rocks, precipitous cliffs and treacherous walkways, rocky enough to be deemed born of volcano, sequestered enough to have been described as the one true space station of the sea. Like many islands deemed unwieldy to the human foot, it has been branded a shapeshifter by those that lose their way. Despite being its most devoted and only inhabitants, Ouse and the Father, in their grief, have taken to regarding these buildings as the place relatives once lived, rather than their very own home. The Father's name is not on any deeds, nor Ouse's either, yet more of their blood is seasoning the soil than some who died here, and the memory of the Mother is kilted into the sky. It is both a simple and a complicated life for the Father and Ouse on Muckle Flugga, mercurial as the moon might make it. Night after night, the lighthouse tears its silhouette into the horizon, taking the gloaming to task for the sins it's covering over. The same stars that reflect dreamily in Muckle Flugga's window panes are those that send ships spinning in circles until the sea's ready to claim them and all life on board. The Father. To those who never knew him before, the Father is notorious for his temper. A rage labelled a danger to other bodies. He has been called bitter, hostile and violent, an aggressor fueled by flame, by smoke. To those who have glimpsed his tenderness, who did know him before, thriving and in love, he is an incorrigible curmudgeon, all caught up in knots, a fighter plane with its engine out, the pilot embracing the fall. The Father is known to have pushed the other keepers away after she passed. The Mother, the snide side of the camp, say it was his fault, that he is to blame for the dying, the horribleness, its unending ache. They say the Father propagates pain, that he has made a loyal pet of it, trained it by firm-handed scolding to do exactly as he said. All discipline, no cuddles. They say the Father is a traitor to his kin, the harvesters, the lost wanderers. He has brothers and sisters who have learned to forget his name. The Father has a glass eye. His own father is responsible for the eye's absence. The Father does not sleep well despite a madcap tiredness. The Father does not eat well despite a constant hunger. The Father once had a knife fight with an American soldier that got handsy with another keeper's wife, and won. He has never bragged about it. The Father is a cruel, brave man. He has struck brave men, embraced crueler. The Father is strong, yet unwell, and unfortunately handsome. The Father charges himself a sentinel twisted, flawed, dreadful, but not faithless, never faithless. It's faith that keeps him fighting. He has sacrificed everything to be here, to serve the light. His family gone, betrayed, lost. The mother gone, betrayed, lost. The dead, invisible, but far from silent. Ouse, his son, will learn by his teaching. He cannot fail him. He cannot.
Oh, thank you so much. Brilliant reading that was. Now, these characters have really stuck with me since I finished reading the novel. Are they still with you? Will they always be with you, perhaps?
I think so. Very much I kept writing the characters. I needed them to have futures beyond where we leave them in the book for that moment to sort of ring and trill with authenticity, and to also ring and trill with imaginative exploration. I don't think any of these characters are ready to stop talking to me. They definitely exist before, during and after this book, and I don't see that going anywhere for the foreseeable.
Do you ever think you'll return to them on the page?
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. Is it rare? It certainly seems that finishing a novel like this, I really want to know more about each and every one, and you really come to care about all of them. And as you say, there are flawed characteristics in all of them, but you understand that, and I think you empathise with that because of it.
Yeah, I think there is, frustratingly flawed as they are, deeply lovable, and each one of them is their own hero and anti-hero at the same time, and there's definitely a whole orbit of possibilities still ringing out in front of them. Yeah. So, and it was a 2-book deal at Faber, so I've got to write another thing, but I'm not putting my flag in the sand at any point in time yet. But I have already written into their futures for the purposes of leaving them where we leave them.
Really? You felt you had to do that?
Yeah, and it was working out where the book was. Very rarely does the book start and end. The story of these characters start and end where the novel starts and ends.
So a bit like someone who might say, if they were playing a character in a film, I had to know the backstory, I had to know things about them which never come out on screen. Similarly here, you had to know these characters. Yeah,
otherwise they're a bit more two-dimensional than they have to be. These characters are hopefully going from 4D maybe into 5D if we work out how that shimmy shammies into existence. But yeah, the characters had to be bigger and bolder in the novel. Their stories span out, and then it was working where the novel existed in their world, when they all collide together, at which point we join them and at which point we leave them.
And now the novel is published. How do you feel about it? Does it change your relationship with it that other people are visiting Muckle Flugga?
Well, we're in that sort of liminal space now, just before publication.
Yes,
I know this might go out slightly later, but it's not out for a couple more weeks yet. So there's only been a very small number of readers, and it's normally your early readers are those that work in media or journalism or literature and are sort of interested in this story, have maybe requested a copy or want to be inside it. So I'm in the real nascent stages of talking to people about the book. I've done a couple of interviews thus far, and this is the most beautifully in-depth conversation I've done about the characters. So the stabilizers are just coming off. I'm so excited about the novel coming out. I feel like it's a morphing of a lot of how I've learned to write, both as a poet and a non-fiction writer, and it takes it to this new level. I feel like they stream together and create this novel, and you only do a debut anything once, but a debut novel for me was always going to be this super salient moment, and I'm so chuffed with the book that's arrived. Yeah,
I think it's an utterly magical book. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to come to the Mitchell and talk to me about it.
It's a total pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.